bumping him off the stage. Thanks for inviting me. And we have technology. Sorry, Jason.
That's all right.
It wasn't there for you.
I
worked on it. I got it. And I didn't bring paper. My name's Joe Knilans, and I used to work with Assemblyman Hebel in the Assembly up until last year. After that, the governor approached me and offered me a position in the Office of Business Development. Because I worked in the legislature and worked with agencies and with the governor's office, it was a good fit because I could take the issues from the office to the different areas and branches of government. I work with Nancy Mistel. That's a common name here in Dane County. I call her Nancy Mistel the Pistol because she's full of energy and a lot of energy and positive energy towards reforming government and regulations. The Office of Business Development was created in 2010 or 2011, and it took the place of like a business ombudsman, and it houses the office or the Small Business Regulatory Review Board. So when, as legislature, we broke up Commerce, we needed to put the Small Business Regulatory Review Board in a place where it wouldn't be in the chicken house or in the hen house as the fox comes in. We wanted to be away from the regulating agencies, so we put it in the Office of Business Development. Now, the Office of Business Development also advocates for businesses. As I've talked to Ann and several others I've met here, we are moving around the state talking to as many business owners in organizations like this as we can, because we think it's important to hear your input on how we can change things in Madison, either it be regulatory issues or agency issues or anything in the state of Wisconsin to make government more efficient in the state of Wisconsin. We do serve as liaison between the businesses and the board and the state legislature and the state agencies. Now, to give you an example, we've taken some issues. Nancy was my partner was up in Rice Lake, and she spoke to a group about this size, and she came back to the office, and about a month later, she got a call from a contractor. And the contractor was working with the developer, and the developer was informed by the DNR that they were going to put a 120-day hold on their building permits for his development. Well, that kind of wiped out his whole building season. So the contractor contacted Nancy in her office. We took it to the DNR. The DNR looked at it from the top and looked down and said, we need to change this. Within 72 hours, that contractor was getting his permits, the developer was getting his permits, and the work started on building houses and creating jobs. And what I put that to is the fact that our agents on the ground level, to no discredit to them, are taught black and white, this is the rules, and I'm sure you've dealt with some of them, either from DNR or Department of Revenue have come into your business. This is the rule, this is how it's interpreted by me, and this is how I'm going to enforce it. And sometimes that doesn't really make sense. And that's where we need to hear that. I mean, I was in Cuba City last night, and I met with a group from their chamber, and one business owner said to me, you know, he owns a cheese shop. He said, I had somebody from DAPCAP come in here, and I had the same agent for years, and we had it worked out, and I'm following the regulations. And then he retired, and a new one came in and say, oh, no, this is all wrong. This is how I interpret it, and we're going to change this. So I had to go through a whole new procedure with a new agent. And that's the problem when we have uncertainty from our agents. And as a state, and this is something that the governor is pushing too, is that we have more of a uniform enforcement of our codes and regulations out there for business owners so they understand a certainty when they deal with the state. The Office of Business Development is outreach. Like I said, we've reached out to trade associations, chambers, economic development corps, and what we offer is the businesses a seat at the table to get your feedback and take that to either the governor's office or the legislature or the agencies. The Governor Walker, we put the Small Business Regulatory Review Board in the Office of Business Development, but has anyone heard of the Small Business Regulatory Review Board? Former legislators not included? Okay. It was established in 2003, and Governor Doyle and the legislature at the time created the board, and the board consisted of 8 agency representatives, 5 small business owners, and 1 state rep. Now, math tells me that the small business owners were outnumbered by the agency heads. And I talked to many past business or board members, and they told me it was very frustrating because there were issues come up. If it wasn't a slam dunk issue, the agencies would stand behind the other agencies, protect the regulations in the agencies, and nothing came out of it. That's frustrating because what the Small Business Regulatory Review Board offered was small business owners to come up and grieve their concerns with the government with regulations. And if you can't come up as a business owner and grieve your concerns and have it heard honestly, then it doesn't do any good. So Governor Walker and the legislature in 2011 revived and reformed the board. We took off all state agencies, all 8 of them, replaced them with 7 small business owners and 2 representatives. We have a state senator and a state assemblyman on the board. And then Nancy and I bring in issues from the business owners to the board, and the board hears the issues and makes, advises either the agency to change things or the governor. And a good example, in 2010, they had an issue come up from legislation that was passed in 2009. And the legislation was, let me see my time here, the legislation was on controlled substances. And it was a great idea, a great piece of legislation, because what it did was it brought a more accountability to pharmacies and doctors who prescribe controlled substances. But the problem is it caught up everybody that was involved in controlled substances, which meant small animal veterinarians and large animal veterinarians. We talked to many of the veterinarians, and they said, I have to hire somebody 4 hours, give them 4 hours pay to make sure, listen to the word, compliant with the state. And that was an overburden on small business owners. So they brought that concern to the board agreed, advised the legislature to change it. They came up with a piece of legislation pulling out the veterinarians out of that piece of legislation, and it was enacted in March of this year. It was a good example of how we heard from small business owners. We were able to advise the agency and the legislature to make a change. They made a change and they moved on. That's a good example of the progress that we can make in the Small Business Regulatory Review Board. Now, as you see, we have the power, the board has the power to review any existing legislation to make changes. So if you've got an issue, you can bring a legislation up to us and we can change a code or take it to the agency. The governor is not looking to repeal all legislation. And unfortunately, that is a talking point out there. But what he wants to see is that the regulations, the codes, and the rules that are out there be smart and be effective and not be overburdensome. So when I say, if you've got an issue to bring to me, and I've got a piece I will hand out, it's a Small Business Regulatory Review Board card. And what this is, if anybody's interested, I got a bunch of these, and you can fill this out and turn it in to us. And we ask for contact information, but we also ask for the legislation or the code that is affecting your business in a negative way. And if there's anything we can do to change that. But the most important is the last question. What we're asking the last question is, as a business owner, how would you modify that regulation to make it work for your business? Not necessarily repealing it, but how would you modify it? If you look at, there are so many regulations that are in the books for 20, 30 years. Technology has gone way past them. How can we change that to bring regulations up to current technology? Another thing that the board can look at is anything that is proposed. If you've got regulation that Representative Hebel writes, and when I was a representative too, we wrote legislation, and if it's not to a point, if it's broad, it gets sent to the agencies, and you have the bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats look at it, and they can write that as they choose. A little bit of an exaggeration, I'd say the color, I passed legislation that says the color is red, and it goes down to the agencies, they don't like that, the color is blue, that's the regulation coming out, although law says red. It's an exaggeration, but it's an example of how things can be interpreted in the agencies differently from the piece of regulation. So, as it is now, the governor has the opportunity to look at regulations. He gets a scope from all the agencies, which gives them a fiscal impact on the state, on the small businesses. They take that, give it to the governor. The governor looks at it and says, okay, this does not have a negative impact on small business. I'll let this go through. Or he can send it back to the agencies and say, you need to redo this because this has a bad impact on small business. It's a very important tool that the governor has, and future governors will have too. when we take one of these, when we turn in one of these, we go to the agency and we say, this regulation has a negative effect on these businesses. I need you to give me the information on it. What they have to do is give me a fiscal impact, economic impact on this regulation on all small businesses that it affects, on the state, and also it has to tell us what our neighboring states do. That's something that wasn't there before. So if we're in the state of Wisconsin and we regulate A, but Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, and Michigan doesn't regulate A, why are we regulating A? Can we change that to make Wisconsin more competitive with Minnesota, with Illinois? We're not close to the border here, but you get over by Minnesota, there's a lot of businesses that are struggling with the different regulations between Minnesota and Wisconsin. So through this, we can come up with drafting realistic rules and regulations, and that's the whole purpose of the Small Business Regulatory Review Board. In 2012, the Governor Walker mandated that the state agencies look at all their regulations. What came from that is the governor's report here from the Small Business Regulatory Review Board. And what that found was they went through 218 Wisconsin chapters, rule chapters. They found 307 rule changes and 40 total repeals. The DNR alone went through about 3,700 pages, and they found about 20 of those repeals came from the DNR. That's a great start, but that's the low-hanging fruit, because that's what the agencies are willing to give up in their regulations. But what we want to know what you, as business owners, are willing to tell us and share with us how we can make changes. Representative Hebel is involved in the right to rules, and you're familiar with that too. The right to rules, what this is leadership from the Assembly instructed all of the committees up there who oversee agencies to look at the regulations in those agencies, pull them out, the ones that don't look right, and let's get rid of them. A representative came up to me in January when I took this position. He says, I've got one we can look at. I said, what is that? He said, in the state of Wisconsin, we regulate the size of the hole in Swiss cheese. Sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? Kind of like micromanaging. As a former state legislator and now a bureaucrat, I looked at it and I said, that sounds ridiculous. Let's get this off the book and free up the cheese industry so they can make more Swiss cheese and not be regulated so much. The Swiss cheese industry said, no, hold on there, Joe, because the whole size in that Swiss cheese determines the quality of that Swiss cheese. So if I would have had my way, taken that out, or the legislator, we could have damaged the Swiss cheese industry in the state of Wisconsin. The point is the future of success comes from you, not from a bureaucrat in Madison and not from a legislator in Madison. We don't know how our regulations are affecting you directly. Only you can tell us that. And that's why we're on the push to find out from you how we can help. Some of the numbers from you guys, thanks. Yeah. Taxes, energy, labor shortage, and regulation is a strong concern out there for businesses. I want to touch on the labor shortage that was brought up before. As I travel around the state, what I'm hearing from businesses, and they tell us that they're not only competing against their fellow businessmen for people, they're competing against the government. Because we give out so many subsidies that people don't want to work. They come in there and they fill out an application, they say, hey, I got a job for you. Well, no, my unemployment's still running, I'm not gonna. No. We've got to come up with ways of addressing that. And that's either auditing through unemployment or doing something to get those people, because if you've got a job there and you're turning it down, you shouldn't have unemployment. The CEOs surveyed and said in Wisconsin, 94% are going in the right direction. When I took office 2010, it was 2010, it was 10%. So those are huge improvements. But again, it goes back to regulation. We can put up all these beautiful numbers on the board here and they look great, and ranked Wisconsin 17th and Site Selector 13th. But if a business looks at Wisconsin and says, hey, you're doing great things, but this regulation, I can't come there, it's gonna kill my business. We need to hear about that so we can make changes to regulation for businesses coming to Wisconsin, but most importantly for businesses in Wisconsin who want to expand. If you want to expand and you're having problems with the DNR, call us up. We'll talk to the DNR up on top and see if we can make some changes. If we can't help you, we'll get you some certainty so you know where the DNR stands on these certain proposals or your issue. And that's all business owners want, is certainty on their business so they can move forward. So they know where the state government is and where they're going to come down on them or they're not going to come down. We can help you with that. Effective administrative code depends on your input. That's it right there. Your input. We can't make the changes and be successful without your input on how we can make changes and what needs to be changed. Any questions? I was a little quicker than you guys said. Yeah.
Are we doing anything about the fact that we tax certain things in the state that none of the other states tax? For example, bullion. In this state, if you bought bullion, you get taxed on it, but in Illinois and the other states, they don't tax it.
I've never heard of that. So, I mean, yeah, there are things, but there are things in Illinois that get taxed and they don't get taxed up here. So it's kind of, you go back and
But
forth.
it's like taxing money. I mean, if you go to the bank and get money, you don't get taxed on it, but yet if you go to a coin store and buy money, you get taxed on it.
That's something you can write up for me. Then I can take that to me. These are the things we need to hear because I've never experienced that. But until I experience it with a business owner, there's nothing I can do. And I can look into that for you and get you an answer back. If you want to fill it out, send it to me. I'll call you back with an answer. Okay? Any other questions?
Do you have extras of these?
Yeah, I sure do. That's always nice to hear. The whole stack.
Are you available to know as well?
Yeah, I can screw off with some questions. Sure.
Here you go. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks Joe and Jason. And I hope you can join us for our membership, which is September 24th.
I know it's too nice.